Hello and welcome to the St. Baldrick's Impact Series. My name's Kathleen Ruddy. On Rosh Hashanah in 2006, doctors were faced with the challenge of saving an 8-year-old girl named Meital. On that day, Meital was diagnosed with T-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. After chemotherapy and cranial radiation treatments that completed in 2009, Meital went on to graduate Summa Cum Laude in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Santa Barbara. She followed that by attaining her master's at Caltech, receiving the award 2 years in a row for the highest GPA in the aerospace program. She remains at Caltech to work on her PhD, and in the process, she's helping to solve the global energy crisis. Please welcome Meital Carmi. Meital, you're working on your PhD at Caltech, one of the best schools in the world. What inspired your love of science and of this particular branch of science?
Yeah, I've been interested in space since I was about 6 years old. It began when my mom and I followed the mission of the Mars rovers Spirit and Opportunity. Every day when I got home from school, I think I was in first grade, we would check the NASA website and see if there were any new findings from that the rovers discovered. And then my parents took me to the JPL open house, and it was almost 20 years ago, and I still remember it so clearly. There was a display of a full-scale model of the two rovers on a bed of rocks and sand that they used to test and make sure that the wheels could go over it. And that was when I knew I wanted to work in space when I grew up. And around the same time, I also watched pretty much every single space shuttle launch. And then I continued being interested in space. And actually, for my Make-A-Wish trip, I went to Cape Canaveral to see a space shuttle launch. And then years went by, and eventually I was a junior and senior in high school, and it came time to actually decide what I wanted to do with my career. I'd known for years I wanted to do something with space, but now I actually was old enough to decide what specifically I wanted my career to be. And I realized that I want to be a member of a team that designs spacecraft and rovers like Spirit and Opportunity. So I majored in mechanical engineering for my undergraduate studies at UC Santa Barbara. I graduated Summa Cum Laude at the very top of my class of about 100 mechanical engineers. And then it was finally time to specialize in aerospace engineering. And I chose the lab that I'm currently working with at Caltech because their research focuses on the actual design and building of spacecraft.
That's incredible. It truly is a lifelong passion. And I think I saw that same lab at JPL on another JPL open house. So I'm really excited that it inspired you in the same way. You're obviously doing much more with it than I could have. I'm grateful for your talent. So what are you working on now?
So my lab's research is centered around the Caltech Space Solar Power Project, or SSPP for short, which aims to generate solar power in space and then wirelessly transmit the energy back to Earth. And there are actually 3 research groups at Caltech collaborating on this project. A material science lab is working on developing the solar cells that will generate the solar power in space. We have an electrical engineering lab, which is working on the antennas, which will transmit the power back to Earth. And my lab is designing the structure, which will support the solar cells and antennas. And here you can see a model that my lab built of the structure and then the membrane that will eventually hold the solar cells and antenna elements.
So you are, go ahead.
So we currently have a demonstration satellite that was launched in January, and it's currently in space. And in May, the satellite successfully transmitted energy back to Earth, and the electrical engineering team received this energy using an antenna on the roof of one of our buildings at Caltech.
That is incredible to me, and it sounds like such a game changer. But I also suspect we won't be powering our cell phones with this quite tomorrow. But this is a huge leap forward in terms of clean energy and just advancing science. Um, how will you eventually be able to direct this energy to local power plants?
Yeah, so this application could, I mean, it has applications to everything that would use electricity. So the way it would work is that the antennas in space will direct the energy to large antennas on the ground that can receive it, and then send that energy to local power stations. And then once the energy arrives at the power stations, we can just use the existing, power lines and infrastructure to get the power to homes and businesses and wherever else electricity goes. So the truth is, for like common users of electricity, it won't feel any different. You'll still have the same power outlets in your homes and whatever, but people will be able to know that the power is generated using clean renewable energy.
So this must have been incredibly exciting for you and all your colleagues working on this project when you were able to do that first import, if you will, of energy.
Yes, it's so exciting. And
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
And yeah, this demonstration mission is so exciting because it's the first step to really making the solar power a reality.
So what specifically, Meital, is your contribution to the project?
So the structure needs to be, actually, let me go back. So my labs, as I mentioned, is specifically working on the structure that will support the solar cells and antennas. And the structure needs to be able to fold in order to fit into the launch capsule, and then to deploy once it's in space and reached its destination. So here in the picture, you can see our structure when it's fully deployed and opened, and eventually in between the structural elements, there will be a membrane that contains the solar cells and antennas. So the structure needs to be as large as possible to be able to support as many solar cells and antennas as possible. But it also needs to be very light because launch costs are mainly controlled by the mass of the payload. So making the structure as light as possible is critical to reducing the cost of generating space solar power. So our lab is building the structure out of carbon fiber composites, which are very light and very strong at the same time. And they're also designed to be very large in order to support a large amount of membrane with solar cells and antennas, and also very thin so that they can be light. However, buckling is one of the main failure modes of these large, thin structures. So specifically, the goal of my research is to characterize the buckling behavior of our structure, and then to figure out the best way to modify the current geometry of the structure to make it more resistant to buckling. And here in the background, you can see a picture of my lab. And on the far right, this large blue cylinder is actually a large oven where we cure our composites. All of the composite that we use to make our structure, we make it ourselves in our lab. And then you can see a whole bunch of other lab benches with various other experiments that we're conducting.
This is incredible to see, and I love getting the sneak peek of your lab because it helps me visualize what you're doing, and the complexity of this project is astounding. Would the technology behind the structure and the buckling problem that you addressed, would that have applications for other uses in science or industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So buckling is a very common problem with thin shell structures, and it's actually been studied since the early 1940s. And certainly there have been advances, but it's still a very commonly researched problem for anything from like, well, cylindrical tanks, for example, were the early, that's what was studied in the 1940s. So now pretty much those don't buckle anymore. We know how to do that. Rockets, for example, are also thin shells, but always trying to make them lighter and thinner. So there's pretty much anything that's very large and very thin, my research would have an application to, because likely buckling is its main failure mode.
I would imagine there'll be a lot of applications for this in medicine at some point as well, and many other academic disciplines. Do you envision, Meital, a day when we're going to have massive like solar farms in space?
Yeah, I do, but a lot of research is required between now and then, which is why our three labs are working so hard to develop the technology that's needed to make this a reality. So to give you some perspective, in order to power a small city using the best current technology that we have would require an array of satellites with a total area of about 1 kilometer squared. And the total cost will be about $15 billion. And this is actually an estimate that our labs calculated using our current technologies just to get an idea of where we are. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how this would scale if we wanted to provide power to the entire US, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're currently, and I mean, frankly, that's not feasible right now. You can't have over 1 kilometer squared of satellites. It's just not feasible. Mm-hmm. So that's why our labs are working so hard to make the solar cells and antennas more efficient, so we won't need as many of them to generate the same amount of power. And also my lab specifically is working on making our structure lighter so that our launch costs will decrease significantly. But it'll take a few years of work, but I certainly think that it's possible to get the technology to a point where space solar power is a competitive alternative to traditional power sources.
Well, I suspect the aerospace field is a field that can accomplish that, because when you think about the computer that powered the Apollo launches and Mercury and all of that, and you think of what our cell phones do today and the progress that has been made over time in technology and so forth, and all the applications that have come from aerospace to medicine and other sciences, I would imagine you're going to get there, and probably faster than it seems like you will today.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because the pace of technology and discovery is so fast. So Meital, you're working on this project now, and I understand you're authoring your first scientific article for publication. Congratulations. You're working towards your PhD. Where do you go from here, and what's your ultimate career goal?
So my ultimate career goal is to be designing spacecrafts and rovers. So I would be looking at working someplace like JPL or maybe another NASA facility or the Aerospace Corporation. I interned there when I was in undergrad and I really enjoyed it. So I definitely would consider going back there. So lots of possibilities, but my ultimate goal and where I will be in a few years will be designing spacecraft.
Well, I hope I see you at a JPL open house one day. We've talked a lot in this conversation about your professional and career interests, and the work you're doing, which is just fascinating and incredible. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here on planet Earth, because what you're doing is so important for all of us. But please tell us more about you and your interests aside from science and aerospace.
Yeah, so in my free time, I enjoy hiking and backpacking and cross-country skiing. Um, Recently, this summer, my mom and I did a 6-day backpacking trip in the Emigrant Wilderness, which is just north of Yosemite.
Mhm.
And in those 6 days, we hiked a total of about 50 miles with a total of about 6,000 feet elevation gain loss. But it's so gorgeous. We saw the most gorgeous lakes and wildflowers and forests. So that's what I enjoy doing in my free time. I love being outdoors.
Well, you could be part of the tourism bureau for the Sierra Mountains, because they are spectacular, and
They are.
I'm glad you love them too. So Maytal, I know that obviously you graduated from UC Santa Barbara, we said, and I know that because you graduated during the pandemic, you kind of got cheated out of a proper graduation ceremony. And I know that was a disappointment. Everybody who graduated during that time was so disappointed by not getting to take that walk, right?
Yes.
So I took the liberty of reaching out to the Chancellor of UC Santa Barbara, Dr. Henry Yang, who sent a special message for you. May I read it now?
Yeah, please.
So he wrote, "Thank you for your email regarding our distinguished alum, Meital Carmi. It is wonderful to hear that she's continuing her academic pursuits at Caltech in the aerospace program. It was my pleasure to write recommendation letters for her and to wholeheartedly endorse her for graduate studies. I remember her from the class that I teach in structural analysis, where I found her to be a most sincere student with an excellent understanding of the fundamental engineering mechanics principles. Meital is an accomplished student and conscientious worker with such a passion for mechanical engineering research and analysis and a determination for life. We are honored to have her as one of our alumni. Please share my warmest wishes with Meital as she continues her academics pursuits. I look forward to hearing about her future accomplishments. Best regards, Henry Yang."
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much.
I
Yeah,
think you have a lot of people very proud of you, Meital.
yes, indeed.
Meital, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing your incredible work. You are an inspiration to many, and we're so proud of you.
Thank you.
During Childhood Cancer Month, we asked, who will you save? It could be a future teacher or relief worker, nurse or artist, or like Meital, a brilliant young scientist who is finding new ways to power our planet. There is good in the world, and we need to celebrate all that is good, as well as the dreams of our children, because every dream and every child should be protected. Please join us in that mission.